Hi, it's Craig and Richard from Monash Mindfulness.
And this week we're looking at meditation, communication, and the mindful use of technology.
So, Craig, a lot of our learners really like the meditation practices this week.
Excellent.
Yeah, some of them continuing on from the Mindfulness for Wellbeing and Peak Performance course and really just kind of going straight into this one and continuing to integrate mindfulness meditation into their lives, which was great to read about.
Yeah.
The comma, people really seem to love the comma.
Yeah.
Just starting small. I mean, it's funny, isn't it, that these days even a 5-minute meditation and taking 5 minutes out of our day can seem a little bit daunting.
Yeah. And if you bring a lot of those little commas into your day, it'll only add up to a few minutes, but they can really be game changers before you head into a meeting or a conversation with somebody. That moment of self-awareness can really change things quite profoundly.
Just breaking up the rushing kind of flow of the day, I think, can be really interesting. Yeah. Mindful listening as well was a very popular meditation, and then we'll talk about some of the applications of that for starting to communicate differently. I love mindful listening as a meditation because one of the things that it does is it takes the attention away from just being in the body with the breath and the body sensations. But we also start to realize that we don't need to do anything to make the sounds happen. The sounds are just happening, and all we need to do is be present. And I think that can be a very powerful thing to realize with a lot of applications, as we can perhaps start allowing other things to just be what they are.
And when we're listening to the sounds, of course, it means we've stopped listening to the incessant commentary running in our heads, criticising ourselves, criticising everything else. I've got so much to do.
Criticising the sounds, thinking about what we're hearing.
And half the time what we're listening to, if we're doing a mindfulness course, is am I mindful or not, and am I getting it or not? And so it's really just the listening practice is a great way to just cut through that.
Yes.
It's so important for communication.
Yeah, big applications.
Yeah.
What about practicing before bedtime? Some of our learners said doesn't that make us more alert and wake us up?
Well, look, when there's a wave of sleep coming on, often the thing that keeps us awake is the mind doing a rerun of the day before and worrying about how much we've got to do tomorrow. So the mindfulness, if there's a wave of sleep, just helps us to catch that little wave, just to be present with the body, just feeling the comfort of just lying in the bed. And you see there's nothing else actually going on at that moment, just feeling the warmth of the bedclothes. Yep. So to be mindful may just help us to just gently catch that wave. And but being mindful, I mean, it may make us more aware, but in a calmer way. I think it just helps us to get to sleep, and that's what most of the research really shows.
Yeah, from time to time I've had people in my courses who meditate before bed and then find that they get more alert and can't sleep, but it seems to be pretty rare.
Yeah.
Or on retreats, there might be a night where I really can't sleep at all from the retreat, but it's fine. You just lie there and just don't worry about not sleeping, and you get up in the morning feeling okay. But for the most part, I find it really helpful. Last night even, I'd had trouble getting to sleep, got out of bed, went and did 20 minutes of meditation. When I got back in, out like a light. So in general, I think it's a very good thing to do.
And that listening practice in bed, what are we listening to? Because chances are, if we're not sleeping in the middle of the night, we're listening to an incessant commentary ahead about how dead I'm going to be tomorrow and I can't stand it. And another 5 minutes is gone. And of course,
and that's actually what stresses us out. Oh, yeah. That creates a stress. That's why we feel bad in the mornings. Yeah.
Now, some people noticing resistance to practice and getting out of the sort of regularity of the practice, and often on weekends, the routine's different and so on. And of course, it takes us a little bit of time, but the resistance, working with the resistance, being aware of it. And it's actually, in a way, it's rather than getting critical of the resistance or even justifying, it's just to get interested in it, to notice the things that the mind does to avoid being mindful, to notice what it is that is actually getting in the way, like just to notice the incessant busyness and just to be interested in that, and that it stands between us just stopping and sitting down for a few minutes.
Yep.
And just to be aware of, well, what's the effect? What's the product of this incessant busyness running our lives? To get curious about that.
And it's interesting because that's happening all the time, but we really notice it when we're meditating. So it becomes an opportunity to really notice very clearly what the effect of that is.
Yeah, and mindfulness is like countercultural. It's the non-habitual mode. And so we shouldn't be surprised that the resistance arises. It's actually, but to be interested and to notice it, to just sort of see what's driving it, to see the way the mind justifies it, etc. And then we might make a few discoveries.
Yeah.
And then find it easier to just sit and practice
and
anyway.
It's a good point, because if we are sitting and meditating and we're feeling uncomfortable or irritated, guaranteed the attention's not just in the present. We're already on the next thing we want to do, or we're getting upset that we're feeling like we're feeling, or we're fighting with the mind.
Yeah.
So we can follow that, and we can actually use it to learn a lot about how the mind works.
Yeah.
Yep.
And a number of our learners noticing it's quite difficult to sit with the uncomfortable thoughts and emotions. And this is a challenge, and this is certainly, it takes time in the maturation of the practice to be able to be aware of the things within ourselves, physically, mentally, emotionally, and to learn to be less reactive. And if we're subtly in the background practicing mindfulness in order to make those experiences go away, then that's not mindfulness. So if it's there, it's there. And this takes a little bit of time. This is not easy. And if those emotions are very strong, that's black belt mindfulness right there.
Yeah.
And we should just be gentle and slow with ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then there's the informal practice and bringing mindfulness off the cushion, so to speak, out into our everyday life. And again, some really great comments and some very pertinent questions actually this week as well. A lot of our learners starting to practice things informally, just bringing mindfulness to everyday activities, but then starting to sort of beg the question, well, should we be mindful all the time? And if not, how do we know when we should and when we shouldn't? And I think this really comes down to what we consider mindfulness to be.
Yeah.
A lot of people maybe think that they need to be slavishly present all the time and never think about the future or
focus,
the past.
Concentration.
Which of course is going to be tiring if we keep focusing the concentration. And let's be honest, we have to think about the future to plan and get through life. We have to remember the past.
But we're grounded in the present moment when we do that.
And it's also okay to let the mind wander, I think, and have some downtime, but perhaps we don't want to get too lost in that. Yeah. So in the end, it comes down to awareness, doesn't it?
It does.
Having that prefrontal cortex activated enough that we're aware of where our attention is from moment to moment, so that we can choose whether we let it wander or whether we bring it back, depending on what the situation requires.
And we choose what to give the attention to and what to leave alone.
Yeah.
Because if we're not mindful in a sense, that going to default in very unhelpful ways may not serve us well. Either a total distraction, or we can go into some pretty uncomfortable places mentally and emotionally.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, Craig, do we have to go and live in a cave and simplify our lives and just sit around and meditate all day? I guess that's the tone of the next couple of questions.
Yes, we do.
Yes, I think ultimately that's.
Give everything away. By the end of this course, you should have sold your house, given all your possessions
quit
away.
Your job.
Found a cave and. But. Maybe you don't want to do that.
It's not for everyone, is it?
No. Letting go of attachment to stuff doesn't mean getting rid of everything.
No.
But the attachment to it, perhaps loosening up and not quite so strong. And being mindful doesn't mean, I can't have a productive life or a rich life. But
people can be very productive. In fact, a lot of business leaders now using mindfulness to really hone their skills and their concentration so that they can be more productive.
Yeah, be more productive, but calmer as we do it, less stressed as we do it, more efficient, because we're using our energy and time better.
Yeah.
But it's not just about driving productivity. And, people have some justifiable concerns about, is mindfulness just a way of taking productivity to higher levels, etc.? But it's a side effect very often.
Yeah.
When people are more mindful, they find it easier and use less energy to get things done.
Yes.
Because we're not in the background got so many of those tensions and stresses and overthinking things and mentally doing 1,000 things that we're not actually physically doing at that time.
Having said that, I was on a retreat recently where for 7 days I didn't talk or read a book or use my phone, and there's something very nice about that. So these days I try to take, maybe a day on the weekend just to really drop in and be present, and to simplify things can actually be quite nice as well.
Yeah. Now, we might find that we just reduce the volume of things in our life, but just the question about, what about news and breakfast and so on?
Eating breakfast while watching the news.
This morning we had some classical music in the background. Yep. I wasn't particularly listening to the classical music. It was just creating an ambient background. I had a very nice, well-made chai latte, and I was just having a look at the news. Now, being mindful, well, in a sense, if drinking while trying to read, then I'm not really tasting it.
No.
And I'm probably not really taking in what I'm reading.
Fully, anyway.
But if you're reading something, oh yeah, okay. And then your attention switches and you taste what you're eating. And then your attention comes back to what you're doing. We're attention switching. We're not, in a sense, diminishing both of those things.
No.
We're doing one thing at a time, but the attention switches. So I don't want you to think, oh, well, it's breakfast, can't have some music on in the background or whatever. It's but the attention is with the one thing at a time.
Fully on one thing at a time.
Yeah, you're having a read of a newspaper while you're having some lunch, then just when you're actually tasting the food, then taste it and then bring your attention back to what you're doing.
Yeah. Then there's communication.
Yes.
And a lot of learners noticing, and it's a very interesting thing, isn't it? We start to pay attention, we notice that our habits of communicating are often very unmindful, planning what we're going to say rather than really listening.
Yeah.
Offering advice, trying to steer the conversation somewhere, and all of that starts to become quite obvious when we pay attention, which I think is really the first step in mindful communication, is to be aware of how unmindfully we normally communicate.
Yeah, and it's not a source of criticism. It's actually interesting and very useful to notice it. Yeah. Yeah, so and one of the things that came up that created a bit of discussion this week is about the Socratic method.
Our friend Socrates.
Yeah, it was pretty unpopular 2,500 years ago because he asked too many questions and copped a bit of flack. But it seems like these days still unpopular 2,500 years later. So hopefully a little bit of forgiveness for Socrates. But when we use that term, the Socratic method, and it is used a lot
medicine
in different settings.
Healthcare
It just really means the capacity to ask questions, to observe and to ask questions, pertinent questions, and with the aim of getting to the truth, not with the aim of being tricky and trying to win.
Getting someone to where you want them to be, but getting to the truth of the matter.
Getting to the truth of the matter. So if we're using that term, that's what we're actually meaning, not trying to twist the truth or to win an argument at the expense of truth. So certainly that's what we're meaning there. But I think mindfulness really helps us to take that kind of inquiring, curious attitude to life, which is what and the really, great minds that we often think of were incredibly curious and asked lots of questions.
Yeah. What is the truth of this life? I mean, it's a very good question to ask, I think, and one that not enough people will ask themselves.
That's right. Yeah, and we'll be expecting answers to that question by the end of the course too.
Yes, right in the comments below.
When you're in your cave.
Yeah, right? So there's communication face-to-face, and then there's technology.
Yeah.
Then there's social media and phones and emails, and that's a whole other level, isn't it? Because when we remove that human interaction, it becomes even easier to communicate unmindfully. To spend way too long on social media or post or hit send on comments or posts that, I don't know if you ever read the comments on YouTube, but people write all kinds of stuff online that they would never, I imagine, hope, would say to someone's face.
Yeah.
So if we're wanting to use technology like social media more mindfully, perhaps we want to pause a little bit before commenting on things, before hitting share on things.
And even posting on this course.
Yes,
just to have a very brief comment before you press send, so you kind of get a sense whether it feels right to post that or whether you need to say something.
Is it an overshare or is it necessary?
Yeah.
I really like Rumi's three questions, one of our learners pointed out. Is it true? Going back to that comment before. Is it necessary? Is it kind? Yeah. Is it going to add something useful to this interaction, or is it perhaps just a reactive kind of venting? And that comma you mentioned, I think, gives us the opportunity to ask ourselves that question.
Yeah. And so, for example, we might be saying something that's true and there might be something that needs to be said, but we say it in a way that is kind, that is respectful, etc. And so that's a very important part of communicating mindfully.
Yeah. And probably the last point, phone addiction in parents.
Yeah. Look, I think that children will learn very quickly from the adults around them, either how to be mindful, because the adult, the parent is paying attention, really engaged with the child when speaking, or to teach the child distraction. Teach the child how not to pay attention. Teach the child how to feign interest. And I think that's one of the really challenging things these days is the addiction to a device and not even aware that that's where the attention is when a child's speaking, etc. Now, sometimes the child needs to wait. I'll be with you in a moment. finish what you're doing. Now, what did you want to say? And engage the attention
But they're
properly.
just watching us and modelling and soaking up like a sponge how to be in the world. So if we're walking them in the pram on the phone, I guess what's that teaching the kid? They're just taking that in.
Or if the child's in a pram and it's got a screen in front of it too.
That's next level, Craig.
That's it. Yeah. So, and next thing you know, you got a 10-year-old who won't pay attention when you're speaking.
Yeah. And what happened?
Yeah. So, so it is an interesting thing, but I think, again, to bring some more awareness to how that technology is being used.
Fantastic. So we'll see you again next week for another feedback video. This next week, we're going to explore relationships, empathy, and compassion. So some very important and powerful applications of mindfulness.
Yeah. And go gently and at your own speed.
Absolutely. With everything in this course. We'd invite you to please follow the mentors so that you can see all of their comments. Also, don't share overly personal details. From time to time, people will do that in this course. And if you find you're really struggling with anything, perhaps consider seeking some professional support.
Yeah.
See you next week.